He basically went from looking like a 19-year-old nerd to a 31-year-old construction worker in 6 months.
Disclaimer, this video is educational and informative in nature. Do not contact anyone shown in this video. Also, this video is discussing steroids. Do not use steroids. This is entirely for educational and entertainment purposes only.
I think the general consensus is that when you get on some kind of steroid or performance-enhancing drug, that you're going to get insane results and that they'll be obvious and very, very clear to everybody else, that you'll take your physique to the next level of being and that you'll accomplish the goals that you had sought out for at the very start. However, this is pretty far from the truth. There's a very diverse outcome that happens when you take steroids, and it is basically you're a hyper-responder, you respond pretty much average, or you're an under-responder. You basically don't get the results that a lot of people would be hoping to achieve when getting on some kind of performance-enhancing drug. Now, before I get too far in this video, welcome. My name is Coach Kolton. I make a lot of videos talking about these kinds of things. I suggest that you subscribe and do some housekeeping before we get too deep into things. My content manager guy said I should call out the businesses that we have or sponsors that we have in the first 15 to 30 seconds of a video. But instead of doing that, I'm just going to shout out a couple people who have been really involved in the channel. I want to give a shout out to Kane. He's commented 108 times on this channel. I want to give a shout out to Matt Epton. He's commented 273 times on this channel. Thank you so much, man. I want to shout out Leon Kennedy. He's commented 114 times on the channel. Bonkers.
Where's everyone going? Bingo.
I want to shout out Natasha Glam. You have commented 49 times. I appreciate you. Chris Bell, the OG. Thank you so much for sticking around this long for one. You've been an OG since day one and commented an insane amount of times. I want to shout out Hovannes Beaver. I believe that's how you say your name. Commented 39 times. I really appreciate you. And then there's Jin420. You've commented a total of 38 times. Also appreciate you. Ponographics, you've commented 33 times. Also appreciate you. And in the last video, everyone was begging for me to show my hairline, so let's go ahead and do that. You guys actually said you'd give me $5, and then several of you said that you would up the ante. So this is my hairline. There we are. That's what we're working with. Back to the video, back to normal business. So today we're going to be reviewing two different examples of what could happen if one hops on steroids. Both extreme, both pretty niche, and I would say almost concerning, but in different ways. The first video is a guy who says he's done a 6-month transformation on testosterone with some tattoos, and he basically went from looking like a 19-year-old nerd to a 31-year-old construction worker in 6 months. Now, I'll be completely honest with you. I think this is naturally obtainable, and I think that absolutely the first set of photos, the guy's actually like more attractive. I don't know if this is like a troll or something, but it's actually insane to me. Like, the difference in these two individuals, it looks like they have the same build structurally, height-wise, everything else, but very well, maybe it is a different person. This is literally a glow down, but it is honestly a pretty solid depiction of what can happen to a lot of people who hop on gear. Now, there was a study published not too long ago, Gym Users and Abuse of Prescription Drugs. This was in 2006, and at that time, they had estimated that steroid users were around somewhere in the 3% park in the United States. So basically the total amount of population in the United States, 3% of those people were using steroids. This has likely scaled astronomically since 2006, and I really wish there was a new public database that showed current information regarding this, but let's just say that in a very, very conservative context, we say about 5% of the United States has used steroids or is currently using them. Well, in 2024, about 25% of the population population goes to the gym regularly, or enough to be considered a gym goer, which is about 77 million Americans. Doing the quick maths there, roughly, really rough, okay? It's about 1 in 4 people being on steroids who goes to the gym. This is just a wild embellishment and extrapolation, so don't take it as true science, but it's pretty accurate. I'd say somewhere around there is the ballpark that you'd be looking at. And I would also wager a bet that those people taking steroids oftentimes don't represent what you would imagine somebody taking steroids looking like. They might be bigger, they might look in shape, or maybe even not, but they don't look to be impressive, to be substantial, to be something that is astronomical and mind-blowing. They kind of just look like a normal guy who started paying attention to his health. But of course, there's also people on the other end of that spectrum. You have guys like Matt here who have clearly had an amazing response to steroids, coming from virtually no physique to within just 6 or less years developing an astounding and massive bulging physique, obviously changing their selves quite a bit. The skin texture there is actually going crazy, but this is the other end of the spectrum, somebody that can respond super well. And obviously in Matt's case, he's quickly transforming, and dose exposure and the selection of steroids and what other compounds may be used here is all up for debate because none of this is really public knowledge when people post, but it's fair to assume that he's been working very hard at this path, and great for him. He has an amazing physique, but I would also wager a bet to say that that other guy doesn't have a poor work ethic either. He's probably a pretty solid dude, does his due diligence. He seems like he posts quite frequently about going to the gym and what else, but I'm assuming he goes to the gym and eats a good diet and all those good things. So what's really making the difference between two individuals like this? What really causes these kind of outcome changes within individuals who take steroids, go down the same path, and have a relatively similar lifestyle? And in fact, if you want more evidence that you can use steroids and, to be honest, get pretty average to sub-average results, all you need to do is look at some of my past videos. We actually did a whole video encapsulating the amount of people abusing steroids at a very high level, posting about it online, publicly promoting it, but not really having much to show for it. So there's a couple of things at play, and I think it's really important to understand, because if you do decide to ever go down that route, knowing that this is not necessarily something that is guided by drug selection, or it's not necessarily something that's guided by how much you use, is really, really important, because it can definitely cause a person to say,
well, I just need to use more. I just need to use more. I just need to use more.
And you go down this endless loop of saying, well, I didn't get the results that this guy did, so he's clearly doing something that I am not, and clearly lying about what he's doing even. So I'm gonna use more until I get the said result. But that said result may never actually be achieved, unfortunately. And in the world of fitness, hyper-responders to anabolic steroids are usually not talking about the reality of the situation, nor are the people on the other end as well. You see, what's actually happening is the hyper-responder group, they're people whose genetics, their muscle biology, their endocrine environment, and their response to mechanical tension, as well as insulin sensitivity and nutritional intake, are exceptionally different and translate extremely well into contractile tissue accrual efficiently. Now, people take steroids because it activates the androgen receptor. You have androgen receptor activation because said anabolic steroid binds to that site and then initiates some degree of genomic change and non-genomic change. That would be where muscle growth happens. But there's one interesting factor in relation to how these androgen receptors work that is not the same between you and me and you and the next guy. And that is how many androgen receptors one might have within a given tissue. So for a brief overview here, androgen receptor density is a very critical thing as it relates to how someone is going to respond to steroids. You could have someone with a very high androgen receptor density, and when they were natural, they may even have had a low testosterone, but had an amazing physique because maybe they had a higher androgen receptor density than the other guy who was naturally sitting at 1,100 nanograms per deciliter of testosterone naturally. And so when they hop on a bunch of steroids and blast themselves to the fucking moon, one of them is going to have a tremendous time. He's going to say, well, I didn't even need to use that much to get a really amazing result. While the other guy is struggling trying to figure out what he's missing that the other guy is doing. In reality, it's just his genomic makeup isn't necessarily aligning his stars to be a absolute mutant. We've also talked about the androgen receptor gene variants themselves in several videos, and this is a very in-depth process that's super hard to kind of explain in a way that makes sense, but there's these things called KEGG repeats, and the lengths of them can change receptor activity, and the shorter the repeats, the KEGG repeats, the generally more pronounced you're going to have a effect of androgenic signaling. And then there's also co-regulators to muscle protein synthesis, as well as the sort of non-genomic and genomic actions of androgen receptors. So it's a bit more tricky than that even, but you can see there's a lot of variability at play. Then another really important factor too is the pool that you have of satellite cells. When you're born, you kind of get a certain amount of them, and some people are born with many, many more than others. And also to be said, myonuclear accretion efficacy is also very hyper-specific to when you are born. Essentially, when you're born, you are going to differ quite a bit in satellite cell quantity, or the pool of them that you do have. And that is going to either give you sort of the leg up on your competition when you're going to go work out or take steroids. And then we get to like the actual pharmacokinetics of the situation, and two individuals are going to respond entirely different to drugs that are the same at the same doses. You may have different absorption rates of said drug, you might have different dose accumulation, you might have even different blood flow to the injection site that you're pinning in. And then everyone also has differences within 5-alpha reductase concentrations. A really important one, aromatase activation. They have either high aromatase activity or very low aromatase activity. I'm someone with like chronically low aromatase activity and can tolerate, higher doses of testosterone fairly well without aromatizing into more estrogen. And then clearance matters too. So you can take somebody who would be taking a normal drug. Caffeine's a really good example because it's one that people can think of that apply to their day-to-day life. There's those people that you meet who can drink a cup of coffee and then like 2 hours later they could go to sleep. And then there's those people that you meet who could drink a cup of coffee and be sustained for like the rest of the day. And a lot of that is how quickly they actually metabolize the drug and how quickly the drug reaches its half-life time, because people differ quite a bit in regards to that with P450 enzymes and a whole bunch of other stuff going on, but there's a lot of interchange there. So in short, basically, if you are a hyper-responder, which is a very real thing, your genomic makeup is almost built in just having been born to allow yourself to grow more muscle than the next guy. And then you add androgens to that environment, and suddenly the expression becomes a wildfire and muscle growth happens without a second consideration. Then you could also be the non-responder, where your body isn't necessarily set up quite right, and you're blasting for basically all the wrong reasons. And in this case, like we see with that first guy, his aging happens astronomically fast. I mean, the dude looks so much older. I doubt it was within 6 months, or maybe that's some kind of rage bait, but the fact of the matter is that's a very real thing, because both groups of people, and this is really important, are still going to experience the same outcomes in terms of side effects for the most part. The aging that we so commonly talk about, the hair loss, the acne development, these things that you see as sort of a negative quality or trait to using anabolic steroids, both groups will experience to some degree, but obviously one is getting a far greater payout than the one not getting really much of anything. And understanding this is so critically important, because you can get yourself down a path where taking more just seems like the obvious solution, when in reality, you just aren't built to have a large, almost dare I say, mutant amount of muscle mass. You may just be the guy who can look exceptionally good and have a great physique for most people's standards, but you're not going to be the hulking brother at the gym, dumbbell rowing 250-pound dumbbells or something. And truth be told, this is why I tell a lot of people as well, you're never going to look like the person that you want to look like when you start your fitness journey. A lot of the times people have these sort of ideas in their head of like, this is the person that I want to be. This is the person that I want to look like. May it be a movie star, a fitness influencer, a bodybuilding competitor. You're unable to achieve that outcome because your genetics are just, quite frankly, too far far different. There's well over 150 genomic expressions that change how one person can look from another person in terms of just their response to hypertrophy training, not dietary intake, not anabolic steroids, nothing else like that. So realizing when you do start your journey, whether that's with or without steroids, there is going to be the situation where you feel like your results may be underwhelming compared to another person's, but you need to understand that your goal should implicitly be, I need to be happy with my body. I can make my body look the best way possible, and that has to be the outcome. Now, there is something to be said about like drug exposure in the sense of choosing different compounds to see what works best for you. For example, you may not have great deals of androgen receptor density, but that means maybe your response to growth hormone could be exceptional. And so you take a bit of growth hormone and now your results are really on par with that other guy's. In kind of creating a diversity within exposure to these compounds is very effective because essentially it allows you to determine, hey, I'm maybe a non-responder to elevated androgens, but over here in the peptide category, when I'm using things like growth hormone or maybe even insulin in that niche compartment of people, that's where I do hyper-respond. Instead of, which is most commonly what you see happening, people just using steroids because it's the only thing they know how to do, get, or the only things that they're exposed to because of their gym mates or whatever the case might be, and hoping that you get results and inevitably not getting them because you're not necessarily a great responder. So trial and error, folks, is basically what I mean to say here. Trial and error. Not everyone is identical, unfortunately. Everyone's going to have a wildly different experience with steroids. That's also what makes them so insidious because the degree of side effects varies so greatly as well. I talk about this a lot, but success bias on the internet is a very real thing. You often are exposed to the people who have the most success doing what they're doing. In relation to steroids and fitness, absolutely. The people who can do this game and be successful at it are the ones that you're going to be presented with. The failures, the people who have the worst possible results, the people that got the worst outcomes, you're never going to hear about them. They're just going to be off in the periphery somewhere, not hitting the algorithm because it's not spectacular. And that's really unfortunate because honestly, that sector of individuals is far larger than the amount of people that you see who have that success bias working in their favor. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. If it was helpful, let me know. If you'd like me to talk about something else, comment down below because that also rocks. I love looking at comments, good or bad. I think they're very useful and I appreciate you very, very much.